my brothers and my sisters, thank you for joining us again for another Wednesday as we study the biblical character Elijah. We have been looking at and using Priscilla Shire's book we're pretty much doing a case study of Elijah, and we're glad that God has used her, and we are being blessed by it. Thank you, all of you who are on. I'm going to ask that the mechanism that you're using, if you can share it. Those of you on YouTube and Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, website, thank you. Those who are listening by phone, Uber conference, we want to say thank you as well. We're going to jump right on in, and we're going to focus on this Wednesday dealing with the subject prayer. All right. Priscilla Shire actually calls it the power of prayer. There is no anecdotal story from Priscilla Shire this week. What we're going to do is jump right into 1 Kings, the 17th chapter. We've been messing around with it, but let's go ahead and hear the story in its entirety. Check it out.
Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him.
Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food.
So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked,
"Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?"
As she was going to get it, he called,
"And bring me, please, a piece of bread."
"As surely as the Lord your God lives,"
she replied,
"I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die."
Elijah said to her,
"Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have, and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land."
She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse, and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah,
"What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?"
No. "Give me your son,"
Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord,
"Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?"
Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord,
"Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him."
The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said,
"Look, your son is alive."
Then the woman said to Elijah,
"Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth."
What a great story. We're going to be going back looking at snippets of it throughout the course of this Bible study. I told you that we're going to be focusing on prayer. I want you to do me a favor and just think about for a second. Let's just imagine if you were teaching an elementary class for a church school. How would you define prayer to your elementary class? Just think about that. This Bible study deals with prayer. There are some significant places where Elijah is talking to God. How would you define prayer? I'll give you a second to think about it. If you've got the ability to chat, why don't you go ahead and hit us up in the chat and let us know how would you define prayer. Now, I looked up a couple of definitions that we can use. I'll start off with the easy one first. It says prayer is an earnest request or wish from God. An earnest request or wish. Then there's another one that had some more words, few more words. An address or petition to God in word or thought. And then gave, an example. I said a prayer for the success of the voyage is the example. An address or petition to God in word or thought, as well as the first one I read was an earnest request or wish. Again, how would you define prayer? How you define prayer will shape what prayer looks like for you. You check out the words here. Your own personal relationship with prayer will guide what you think. How do you feel about prayer? Do you feel confident when you pray? Does prayer sometimes tend to disappoint you? You talk to God and you feel like there's no response, so you become disappointed. I do it because I know I should. I find prayer to be uncomfortable. Prayer for me is a priority or something else. What's your personal relationship with prayer? Do any of these pieces on the side speak to what your personal relationship is, or is there something else? You can go ahead and jump in the chat there too. Again, we're here, we're looking at what you're sharing, and we appreciate anything that you share. What's your personal relationship with prayer? I take it a step further. What's the current status of your prayer life? Priscilla Shira wants us to think about a couple of things. She actually asked us in the devotional piece that is attached to this study. Do you typically struggle with making larger, supernatural, miraculous requests of God? And if so, why? Do you feel comfortable asking God for things that seem small or insignificant? Why? What's your current status of your prayer life? And I want you to be honest, because the only way you're going to be able to be better is if you're honest. Is it infrequent? Is it consistent? But you don't pray daily. Is your prayer life formal? I mean, you starting off with the King James language in your prayer. Do you usually pray as a reaction to a crisis, which means that you really don't talk to God unless there's something going on? Fervent, passionate, ongoing prayer. Is that you? Is it habitual like a mealtime blessing? What's your current status of your prayer life? All right, we're going to jump in with this text and look at a couple of pieces of it. Then I'll come back from time to time and just kind of share some thoughts. Check out the first part of 1 Kings 17.
Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse, and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah,
What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? No.
Today's last lesson from Zarephath is about the all-important issue of prayer. Prayer is a key, fundamental part of our journey with God. It is. At Zarephath, we learn the power of prayer. It's an important issue because, quote unquote, after these things, after God had been daily providing meal service for Elijah and the widow in the text, the Bible says something terrible happened. You saw the text. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. Something crazy happened. Her son stopped breathing. He came down with a severe illness, serious enough that he died. He stopped breathing. That's what the text says. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. That means that the brother died. And in the wake of this tragedy, we're about to see an additional aspect of Elijah's spiritual life and character being refined and fortified for a future use. Think about how this stunning turn of events must have seemed to them, both of them. They thought, and if you go back and look at the story, they thought that they dodged the famine bullet. You know that God had been doing things for Elijah prior to him coming to this widow's house. They dodged famine. God had been feeding them enough for them to live on every single day. Remember, prior to this part of the story, we heard that Elijah asked the woman to provide him with something to drink, then provide him with something to eat. She said that this was going to be it. She was getting ready to die. She didn't have enough for her and her son. And then Elijah tells her, listen, you go ahead and make me some bread. God's going to make sure that you got enough. And they dodged the famine. And God is feeding them enough for them to survive, to keep them alive. But now it all seems like everything is blown up, and the mother's greatest fear has become a reality. And immediately she starts to do what? She said to Elijah, what do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? She starts to assign blame. Hey, this thing has been hard. I mean, my question is, have any of you, at the end of this text, you've got a mother that's frustrated with the dead son, and now immediately she pokes the blame on Elijah. And I wonder, Priscilla Shower has us asking the question, have you been unjustly accused of something before? If so, how did you respond? Did you defend yourself? Did you keep quiet? Did you pass blame on to somebody else? Did you do something else? Shower wants us to look at this text and get a glimpse of Elijah's response. Instead of defending himself, instead of returning his emotional volley, instead of taking offense at her, at her attack on him, the man of God, his reputation, in essence, he was quiet, he was calm, he was compassionate. He didn't react in a way, listen, that we usually do when somebody is throwing shade our way. As proof of that, it shows us that Elijah has learned lessons from Gilead, from Kerith, and now from Zarephath. And he looks away from the accusation and the frustration, and he turns upward to God. Listen, follow the text.
Then he cried out to the Lord.
Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?
Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord.
Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him.
I like this piece because Elijah immediately takes his concerns to God in prayer. Look at the beginning. Then he cried out to the Lord. He took his concern straight to God in prayer. A part of the process of maturing should be that prayer becomes, listen, a natural reflex into our conversations with God at the most awkward and the most unfair moments. Instead of being rattled by what somebody says, by their ugly, cutting words that may come out of their mouth, our own instinctive reactions, listen, can flow from what God has continually been maturing in us. And I know some of us would have, we would have handled this thing so different with the widow. The widow said some slick stuff to you. You ready to pop off back at her. And Elijah instead, he doesn't respond. I would assume he's in a relaxed, calm, listening posture. And he cries to God, Lord, have you brought tragedy even on the widow? All right, then he stretches himself out over the boy 3 times. What he does is he also says to the widow, listen, let me take the boy. All right, and so he is positioning himself to see what God will do. God's process, and I hope you hear me today, loud and clear. God's process of maturity teaches us about the powerful exchange of prayer. At each stage, progressively, Elijah has made an exchange. He's done it at Gilead, at Ahab's court, done it in Kerith, and increasingly during his path at his journey in Zarephath. And that's what we can expect. The fruit of the lessons of maturity will become ripe in the moment of our crisis. Listen, these practical and deliberate, consistent words. As we process, or as we mature in the process teaches us about the power that comes in the exchange of prayer. And what do we see? We immediately, you see it here, read with me. Exchange pride for humility, exchange self-assurance for reliance, exchange independence for divine independence, exchange doubt for firmness of faith, exchange panic for peace. I want you to think about this. What can I do? What practical, deliberate action can I take over the course of the next 24 hours that will show that I'm working toward the same type of exchange that Elijah is working toward? In the midst of one of my most pressing circumstances or relationship struggles, can I exchange my pride for humility, my self-assurance for reliance? Can I exchange panic for peace, doubt for a firmness of faith? Because I'm believing that we can mature in the process, take our stuff to God, it'll keep us out of making some very painful and hurtful decisions. As God matures and refines us, life's crisis won't be as capable of flipping the switch inside us that rams us into fear and anxiety mode. Instead, they will trigger an innate reaction within us to call out, to cry out to God, to trust God, to rely on God's sovereignty. Elijah made this exchange. We see it here in Zarephath. We see its heat already building in his life, showing signs that it can stand up to the increased scrutiny yet to come. The lessons he learned about prayer in this fire at Zarephath will teach him how to call down fire at Mount Carmel. There are three lessons that Priscilla Shower has for us. Three lessons that, as it relates to prayer, that Elijah's example teaches us. Here's the first one. Take the whole problem to God in prayer. That's lesson one. Take the whole problem to God in prayer. Now, Shira says when Elijah scooped up the widow's lifeless son, he literally, hear me, was carrying the problem to the Lord, the entire problem. He was presenting to God the entire, with the body, devastating reality that he just witnessed. There's no masking, no denial, no sugarcoating. This is it. No time for pious rituals or platitudes, but simply going all in with the one who Elijah believes could infuse life-giving power into the situation. I told you in 1 Kings 17, verse 19, the first part of it, the A part of it, he says to her, give me your son. All right? Now, here's a question I have for you before we move on to the next slide. Is there a glaring need or battle in your life right now that you've not fully presented to God in prayer? Think about it. Have you withheld some stuff, not told God everything? Have you postured and positioned it so that it doesn't sound as messy as it really is? Lesson one, take the whole problem to God in prayer. Lesson two is coming up. Cultivate a place of priority in prayer. Cultivate a place of priority in prayer. That's the second lesson. Now, many scholars believe that this upper room where Elijah took the body was likely the space in the house where he'd already been doing some prayer. When I first read the text, I purely thought that it was where he spent time. And it was where he spent time that he had cultivated a place where prayer was a priority. He was accustomed, y'all, to praying there. That was his prayer place. All right? It was his quote-unquote war room. All right? He took, this is 1 Kings 17 again, he took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Now, I'll be the first person to say that there is nothing magical. All right? And Priscilla Shower kind of shares the same thing. There's nothing magical about praying in a specific place. All right? And you can pray wherever you want to pray. And I would assume that during this time of quarantine worship, quarantine spending time with God, that you've learned to pray in your bedroom, in your den, in your kitchen, in your car, wherever you created that place where you prayed without ceasing. All right. Now, I'm certain that because of us moving around in spaces, we've covered a whole lot of ground throughout the course of our daily prayer. But having a specific place of prayer, Shower says, can signify the priority we've placed on prayer. Now, when you got that place, and that's where you pray, then your prayer becomes priority. That is your priority space for praying. If I want to see some stuff happen, if I want to see the power of God and how God has been moving, then I know where I go to see that type of movement. So here's the question before we move on. What do you consider to be the value of a go-to place where you can run to God in prayer on a regular basis? What you think? Respond. Now, I know some of you just be watching and you can't chat based upon the way your phone is set up. But I want this to be a little bit more interactive today. So hit me up. What do you think the go-to, or is there some value in a go-to place? Lesson 3. This is the third lesson. And hopefully you're writing these down or something. Expect God to answer unreasonable prayers. Now, his audacious prayer, Elijah that is, audacious prayer request came with no blueprint for him to follow. Shower says, apart from the ancient biblical account of Enoch, who wasn't even dead when God just, quote unquote, took him from earth to rapture glory, there's not a single record from any earlier scripture that hints at a precedent for resurrection prayer. And there's certainly no prescription for a decision to lay across the boy's dead body. In fact, according to Jewish law, touching a human corpse resulted in a 7-day quarantine. And that's Numbers 19:11. And many of us know what that quarantine looks like. Elijah would have considered this physical contact with a dead body as being vile and unclean. And yet, his compassion for his family, a compassion forged in the fire of his own need and suffering, trampled all these protocols. He blazed his own trail, launched a prayer so bold into the heavenlies that no one in recorded biblical history had employed it before. Shower says his faith had caught fire. His faith had caught fire. She attributes it, and I agree, to him being in Gilead, to him being in Kerith, him being at Zarephath. How God has been showing him what God can do. And so Elijah at this point now was at a place where it just wasn't about having faith. It was about living in the faith. It was about his faith being action. All right, check out the text.
Then the woman said to Elijah,
Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth.
We want a faith that can believe God for moments like this. A moment when Elijah can walk back into that widow's house with her son walking right beside him. Whatever it has taken to get here, we want to hear someone say, like the mother, now I know that you are a man of God. Now I know that you are a woman of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is true. That's the kind of faith that we want, where we can believe that God can operate in these types of moments. And here's the thing about faith, this great, bold type of faith. Our faith can compel those closest to us to know that God is real. Our faith can excite those to discover the power of God for themselves, even as we continue to try to grow and mature our own faith, developing strength and fortitude in the process. It's something about our faith that can motivate and encourage other people's faith to live faith and not just have it. It's something about our faith. When you step out in bold faith that can make others do the same thing. And I've seen it, I know you've seen it so many different times when people that we've been connected to step out in a way that does not make sense to us. But when we see it, it makes believers out of us. God's got some work for Elijah to do, and all of this was about the process. Listen to this quote from the theologian and biblical scholar F.B. Meyer. And we're almost done, but I want you to hear this, and then I'm going to share something that Priscilla Shira shared. Many a man might bear himself as a hero and saint in the solitudes of Kerith or on the heights of Carmel, and yet wretchedly fall in the home life of Zarephath. It is one thing to commune with God in the solitudes of nature and perform splendid acts of devotion and zeal for God in the presence of thousands. But it is quite another to walk with God day by day in the midst of a home with its many calls for constant forgetfulness of self. Priscilla Shira says this: for roughly 18 months, Elijah has been alone in Kerith, learning to live within the context and cadence of silence. Adjusting to this dynamic of separateness has steadily refined the prophet in one way, but the new dynamic of Zarephath will refine him in another way, one which extended beyond the scope of simple geography. For herein, and this is what she says, for here in Zarephath, he would shift from living alone to existing within the context of a family, making his home with this widow and her son. Shira says this, y'all: this new dynamic with its daily mundane demands and relational nuances, and I'm reading this because it's good stuff, would methodically and intentionally wean him from the ingrown tendencies that come from an unrestrained solitude. Hear me. He would transition from a life in which he could be concerned only about his own needs for a season, in which awareness and thoughtfulness of others would be essential. The constant give and take of this type of life, even if it's a surrogate life, is precisely the dynamic that God often uses to mold us in a unique way. Solitude may be beautiful, it may be restful, but if allowed to become unbalanced, it can also make us self-absorbed, stuck in our own needs and our own thoughts, unconcerned and unable to walk in relationship with others. Too much time alone can cause us to become hardened, narrow, desensitized, one-dimensional. People can become little more than a bother or a threat, a problem we're forced to bend our plans and agendas to, instead of a holy opportunity and gift to relate to. But she also says this: have you ever noticed, though, that it often seems easier to sense the peace and presence of God and exhibit the fruit of God's Spirit when you are by yourself? Have you? You're just sitting on the porch rocking in your chair, going for a walk by yourself, off at a retreat, looking at a lake while you're on vacation, or sitting on the beach, even if others are around, but you're in your own focused place. When you got your worship music playing, and you cleaning the house or sitting in your office, in solitude, where there are no interruptions and nothing and no one to pull you away or challenge your choices. Patience is not required then or cultivated. In solitude, we only need to consider our own needs, our own desires and struggles. When there are no dishes to be done, projects to tackle, problems to solve, dilemmas to disentangle, people to serve and prioritize, last-minute homework to help to finish, much more vigilance is required to keep the same awareness of God's presence and to live in light of it. The most beautiful and astonishing opportunity for experiencing this beautiful dynamic for every believer in any seasons or situation in life is when God allows you to be connected to a family. The family of God into which we are born when we place faith in Jesus. By his grace, we are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with the saints. We are part of the family of the household of God. One of the things that I believe that God is trying to get us to see through this particular text, as we look at the power of prayer, how our brother Elijah didn't get caught up in the moment, the widow's frustrated, the son is dead. Elijah talks to God because he's matured in the process. But I also believe that God is showing us that God sometimes isolates us alone to prepare us for when God moves us into a place to minister to people. Sitting at the brook, being fed by the ravens, waiting on the brook to dry up, all in isolation. Growing up in the hill country of Gilead, having to spend so much time by yourself, I believe it cultivates and it sharpens a certain awareness, a keen awareness, to be able to get connected to God. And when the time is right, God will move you from Kerith to Zarephath, and then God will move you to Mount Carmel. But all of it is a part of the process. So the Kerith experience is prepare you to do the ministry of Zarephath. And I'm trying to tell you today that I believe that God has a ministry for you. All of this preparation over the last 12 weeks we've been talking about, each one of these processes and these places, God has been preparing you. And you think the solitude, being by yourself, is a bad thing? No. God has been tightening you up so that when you get to the widow and her son, you can be able to deal with what it is that God has for you. Because if you weren't ready, then your response would be different. But because Elijah was in tune with God, the moment happens, he doesn't freak out. He just goes to God in prayer. He talks to God. He hears God. And then he makes himself available to God. All right, we're wrapping up for today. Listen, if you were to make an unreasonable, unthinkable prayer request, what do you think it would be? And you ain't got to be limited to one. You think of as many as you can. If you had a prayer request like Elijah, ain't never been done before. This young brother dead. Do something. What would your prayer request be? And I'm telling you, you don't have to wait. We can pause right now for you to pray it. Let your faith be set ablaze. We're going back to our closing prayer. You see it there on the screen. I want you to read it along with me. Lord, I repent today of any pride, of any unspoken sense of superiority, of any callousness that has kept me from connecting with certain people. Refine me, God. Sanctify me until I reflect the image of your Son, Jesus. By your Spirit, I hope you're reading it with me. Give me perspective and vision to see the bigger story that you're trying to tell through my life. And when I can't see it, help me to trust. Thank you that my emptiness is not in vain. Tenderize my heart to live in authenticity, humility, and yielded surrender while I'm here in Zarephath. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. And we're ending this lesson with prayer. We've been doing the same prayer for the last couple of Bible studies. I'm hoping that you can pray with me at a new level of believing, a new level of believing faith. A faith that feels like a perfect way of capturing what God has been pouring into us. Thank you, my brothers and my sisters, for joining us today. Guess what? We've been doing this now for about 3 months, and we still got a little bit more to go. Elijah has some more places to go on the journey. So still journey along with us. Every Wednesday here at noon and 6:30. I pray that you'll encourage somebody who was not able to jump on with us today to catch this word, because I'm believing that there is power in prayer, but there's also power in the process. Mount members, jump over on Zoom and join us. If you're watching, the Zoom number is right there. Go to your Zoom link, jump on, enter the number. Those of you on Uber Conference listening, hang on. And you know how we do. Hang on and we'll come on and we'll talk. Listen, let me tell you guys real quickly. Get those vaccines. That's all I want to tell you. It's phase 2. Officially, the governor opened it up on Monday for all of us to be able to get the vaccine now. If you're 16 and older, get the vaccine. I know that they hit the pause on the J&J. 6 cases, six out of 7 million cases. And so they're going to look at that and bring that back. But in the meantime, I need you to go and get that Pfizer, get that Moderna, get that first shot, come back a couple of weeks later and get that second shot. I want to see y'all. I want to be able to be around you. I want to be able to be comfortable around you. And I want you to be able to be comfortable around other people. But you can't do it if you don't have the vaccine. You need to be fully vaccinated. All right? Now, that's all I wanted. Jump on with us, family, Mount family members. And for the rest of you, we see you on Sunday. Join us for worship, 10:45. If you need groceries, come by on Friday, 12:45. And we'll see you on next Wednesday as well. Everybody else, jump over. Zoom,